Galatians 4 and verse 15. So maybe, I guess I probably should, although this may not be the best way to approach this. Did anybody, we didn't really get a lot of, we got no give and take on Sunday. You just were given the whole time, and I took. So were there any questions about that text, about that first few verses of Galatians 4 really kind of stand out? Something like, that little part right there I wasn't really sure about. Anything in that text, this is your opportunity. Speak now and forever hold your peace. Okay, there it went. If you have more elaborate questions or further things, you can ask Steve. So, verse 15, we're in the middle of this paragraph, but this is really an important little section. So, verse 15, let's work down through verse 20. So, verse 15, but what then was the blessedness you spoke of? For I bear you witness that, if it had been possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me. Have I therefore become your enemy, because I tell you the truth? They zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. But it is good to be zealous in a good thing always, and not only when I am present with you. My little children, for whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you. I desire to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you. All right, so back up in verse 15. So, pretty customary of some of the things Paul's been doing in this epistle. There's a few statements here and there that are a little ambiguous. What's he referring to? It's not really explicitly clear. Perhaps it's something that even transpired between him and them. And so there certainly would suggest some statements that suggest an intimate relationship between him and the brethren in South Galatia. That's probably what some of these things are. The blessedness you spoke of, there's some interaction there between him and the Galatians. He says, I bear you witness that if it had been possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me. In the context, well, that certainly suggests something with his eyes, but in the context, why is that such a significant statement? Now, you might go back to our study on Sunday and a couple of verses just before this. What's so significant about what he says here?
He had an infirmity that he explained in verse 13.
Yeah, verse 13. So if you'll notice verse 13, he says, I preached with physical infirmity. And I made the note in the Sunday study that all sorts of speculation about what was wrong with Paul. I don't know. No scholar knows. It does seem most reasonable, because of verse 15, to suggest he had some issues with his eyes. And historically speaking, that's very, very common in the first century culture. And it would be particularly common of a man who spent a lot of time traveling in the first century culture. Okay? Didn't wear a lot of bug shields over his eyeglasses when he was riding his motorcycle, stuff like that. But a lot of eye issues, pretty common in the first century culture. And so whatever Paul's dealing with here may also be hinted out in chapter 6 when he says in chapter 6, verse, that's just great. There was a verse there. Verse 11, there it is. This helps. Verse 11, see with what large letters I have written to you with my own hand. Sounds kind of like somebody who's got some struggles with their eyes. Their vision is not what it used to be. What do people with bad vision do? They write in larger letters so they can see. Maybe that's what's going on with Paul here, just don't know. But what verse 15 very clearly depicts is how much they really cared about Paul. So not only is it odd that they were so receptive to the gospel, even though Paul obviously had some physical infirmities, it's even more remarkable that the brethren were looking at Paul and saying, man, if we could, we would rip out our own eyeballs and give to you. Guys, that is some drastic language. By the way, the next couple of verses, he's going to get even more drastic, more vivid in his imagery, and that's going to continue into chapter 5 as well. So he says, I would testify on your own behalf. You would rip out your own eyes and give them to me. So verse 16, have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Now, we, generally speaking, quote that verse out of context quite a bit. I'm not saying we're misusing it. Don't misunderstand me. I think, generally speaking, when brethren use that verse, they're using it correctly. What I want you to notice is, it's in a much more powerful context than we generally consider it. Oh, I spoke the truth and now you think I'm your enemy. No, it's even more than that. Look at how Paul's using it here. Paul's talking about some very important relationship with individuals, very, very warm, familial relationship with individuals, such a blessing. He says, I'm speaking the truth to you. Am I your enemy because I'm doing that? No. And by the way, is that not just so relevant still today? What happens, especially in our culture with social media like it is, what happens? Somebody speaks the truth. Oh, bad dude. Bad dude. Shouldn't be saying that, can't be saying that, shouldn't, ought not, whatever it may be. We sometimes too easily throw people into the enemy camp simply because they said what was true. Paul's acknowledging some of that here a little bit. Well, I'd say more on that, but I'll leave it alone for now. Verse 17. Some of these things are going to kind of fit together in just a second. So verse 17. They zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. That's my New King James. How does verse 17 read, the New American Standard? I know, Larry, you use the New American Standard. You don't have it with you tonight. Look at that. Somebody got the New American Standard?
They eagerly seek you, not commendably, but they wish to shut you out so that you will seek them.
Okay, you hear that? Eagerly seek you. So mine says they zealously court you. Mine almost has like romance language implied in it. And by the way, I think that that's true. I mean, certainly every noun and verb has some connotations to it. And so that's there in verse 17. It is almost like they're romancing you. You know, they're just coming along, saying what they want to say that will woo your heart. Just exactly what you want to hear. Wow, is that kind of relevant after our 2 Timothy study? They have itching ears, seeking to heap up for themselves teachers who will turn them away from the truth and tickle their ears. Guys, wow. False teachers really have one modus operandi, and that is say what they have to say to get their doctrine believed. You know, I don't know if we think about that as much. False doctrine is fairly common for false doctrine to be appealing. If it wasn't appealing, then nobody would ever believe it. It would have nobody in the world who goes, I'll die on that hill. There's an appealing element to it, generally. Okay, I'm generalizing here. But generally, there's an appealing element to it which makes it so much more tantalizing, so much easier to swallow whole. Verse 17, they zealously court you. They're romancing, but it is for no good. So Paul's acknowledging they're doing these things, perhaps even saying things that twist the circumstances, that get a little bit more attention, that maybe get a little bit more acceptability, but they're not doing it for the good. They're not doing it for good reasons. They're not doing it for good ends. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. You see, part of this is a total misunderstanding is leading to a relationship, essentially, where they're with you instead of with the truth. They've bought into this, no bueno at all. And it's interesting, before somebody thinks, Paul's really jumping on this whole zealous stuff. Like, he doesn't want Christians to be zealous. Christians shouldn't be zealous. I mean, we shouldn't be passionate. We shouldn't be excited about what we do or what we believe. He comes in verse 18 and says, it is good to be zealous and a good thing always. And not only when I am present with you. So, verse 18, the issue he's taking in verse 17 is not the fact that they're passionate. It's not that they're zealous. It's not that they're fired up or excited. It's that they're buying in to a lie. They're buying into a lie. And where do lies lead? That's tough. I challenge you to say that about 3 times really fast. Where do lies lead? Well, they don't lead to anywhere good. Do y'all see that in the passage here? So there's the chief issue. So much of what he's saying in this context, so much of what he's going to say in chapter 5 when he comes back to some of these ideas, is going to tie in really neatly with what he started the letter saying in Galatians 1, 6 through 9. But I marvel that you're turning so soon from the gospel. There's not another gospel. And even if we are an angel from heaven, this is a serious, serious deal. Okay? He pivots just a little here. So are there questions on that couple of verses there? All right, so let's look at these next two verses together then, because there's something here that I think is really important. So verse 19, my little children, for whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you, I desire to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you. All right, I want your help here. What's the image he's using? What's one of the images he's using? Labor. Okay? So in labor, who would he be in this labor? The mother. Generally speaking, first century culture, not terribly different from our own culture. Not a lot of very masculine dudes are going to go, I feel like a lady. No, but what does that say about Paul, by the way? What does that say about Paul? I want you to zero in on this in verses 19 and 20. Okay? There are several little statements, and each one has a common thing about it. Do y'all see what it is? If I was to describe Paul's attitude, Paul's disposition towards the brethren in Galatia from those two verses, what would it be? He loves them and he's disappointed. Okay, I like that. I like that a lot. Loves them and he's disappointed. What else might we see in those two verses? Now, think about that first thing. He loves them. So what else might we pull out of those two verses?
Well, it's causing him some kind of pain and discomfort to think of them this way.
Okay, I like that. So there's some discomfort, some pain. He sees them and it's not the way it should be. Yeah, I think we're spot on. We might use a word like compassionate. This really stirs the compassionate side of Paul. Now, here's what I want you to see. Why is that so significant in this context, folks? Where did we cover just a few verses ago? What sort of ground did we cover just a few verses ago?
Is it that they were compassionate to him?
They were compassionate to him. So there's this mutual compassion. Man, there's a lot of love here. I mean, this is just really in a section you don't expect. There's a lot of other things happening. You don't expect some mushiness here. There's some mushiness here. But guys, there should be some mushiness. When we're talking about the family of God, we're talking about brothers and sisters in Christ, and we're talking about souls on the line. There should be some zeal, some passion, and some compassion. Go ahead, Jeff.
Especially the points we made starting the book.
Mm-hmm.
That it was unusual for Paul to be this direct.
Yeah.
And this, what would seem like harsh.
Yeah.
But then, to me, this explains that harshness.
Yeah.
The way we would be with family or
Yeah.
our own children.
Yeah.
Or things of that nature.
Yeah. Does a parent ever have the right to be direct and to the point with their children? You better believe it. Because they love them. I had that conversation with somebody just recently. We've got a friend who's in error or going into error. What if you had a child running into the street? Would you be direct? Would you be to the point? Would some perhaps say, you're being a little harsh about that? I've jerked up a kid and wore him out walking back to the house too. Oh, you're so harsh. You're just mean. You're cruel. No, I want that child to learn it does not belong in the street, right? That's called love, folks. And so I think we need to see that. Paul's navigating some of that water right here. He says in verse 16, you think I'm your enemy because I'm telling you the truth. But guys, I am the compassionate mother in this scenario who's trying to help save your soul. And I want you to see this, okay? I'm not making more of this than that's there. My little children. Boy, hey, that flags us right there. Hey, whoa. He's not been that nice and familial to them in this entire epistle. Why? Because he's trying to zero in on some of this stuff. My little children, I have labored in birth pain. Yeah. I desire to be with you. I want to be there. Some of the reason he wants to be there is because of the same problem we still have today. How well do written exchanges go? Not generally as well as face-to-face interactions. Maybe as a side note application, a whole lot better off to say some things in person than it is over a text or something. But you get this. I wish I was there so that I could change my tone. A lot of things are not conveyed in text, and that's just the way it is. There's a reason why sometimes if you text me, might be a pretty good chance I'm just going to call you. If you have a serious question, probably not going to text it back to you because I can't convey tone in text. But I can convey tone when I speak to you over the phone. And so he says, I have doubts about you. This is a very touchy situation. There's not just one single Christian whose life is on the line here. Got to remember, who's Paul writing to? Who do we generally believe Paul is writing to? Churches. Churches. Remember that plural. Churches in Galatia. So this is not even a situation like in Rome where he's writing to perhaps a single congregation, although there's a lot of discussion about that. That's a bigger can of worms than I'm going to open right now. Or writing to the church in Thessalonica or church in Philippi, something like that. Or even writing to Timothy, who is in Ephesus. In this situation, he's writing to an entire region. Probably the Christians he helped convert on his first missionary journey with Barnabas. And so we're talking about several congregations, at least 3, maybe 4. Maybe even more than that. We're talking about a lot of Christians this is affecting. And so, man, why is he so compassionate? Why is he so moved? Why is he so obviously emotional about all this? Because there are souls on the line, and he wants to prevent them from committing spiritual suicide. Does that make sense? All right, he's gonna change gears just a little bit, although he's still on the same point. Did I miss anything in that little paragraph? Maybe a question or something on that text?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jeff. Always like your questions. Steve, are you ready? Go ahead.
Is this when he was there originally, said the churches taught him did he and Barnabas go there directly from Lystra after Paul was stoned and left for dead?
Well,
I know there's discussion about that.
yeah.
And don't want to read too much into that.
Yeah.
It could go to Paul would have had to have been in pretty bad shape.
Oh, yeah.
Barnabas basically take him up and them.
Yeah.
Go here.
Yeah.
And he talks about his physical infirmities, whether it's eyesight or, surely he suffered.
Oh, yeah.
From the stoning and all.
Yeah. Well, and keep in mind, he even mentions the marks of his body and the marks on his body when it comes to the crucifixion, when it comes to the persecution, not crucifixion, it comes to the persecution, excuse me. Now where all that fits exactly, Jeff, I'm just not real sure. I do think, though, as you go read the Acts account, Acts chapter 13 and 14 is what we're talking about. It's pretty clear the brethren know what all Paul has gone through, what all Paul continues to deal with, because Paul is stoned and left for dead and then gets up and goes right back to preaching and goes back through some of the same area. So the brethren there, in fact, there is some scholarly discussion about this whole issue in verse 15 and in verse 13 being related to his persecution. That perhaps some of the things he's struggling with physically are because, he's caught a few stones in his face in his life. I think that would affect a person too. Don't have any way of being dogmatic about it, but it is certainly plausible considering what we do know from the written text. Good question. So glad I could not answer it. Verse 21. Now, this is a section where, generally speaking, people go, okay, we had a pocket there where I knew what he was talking about, and now we're back to a spot where I have no idea what's going on. Galatians does that occasionally, and Romans does that occasionally, but let's just kind of keep in mind the bigger concepts that he's talking about here, okay? He takes a little excursus here for just a moment, in especially verses 8 through 20 of this chapter, but what's he really been talking about? Let's think for a second here. What's he really been talking about? Go back maybe a class or 2 ago. What's he been talking about?
Old law versus the new covenant.
The old law versus the new covenant. So we're dealing predominantly with the law of Moses and Judaistic teachers coming in, Jewish Christians coming in, and trying to kind of wed the two together. You have the law of Moses and circumcision, and it kind of fits neatly right here with the gospel, and you got to kind of keep both. Well, that doesn't work. And so after we've taken this kind of side quest, this excursus here, he returns back to that issue. So what's the issue? Where does the law of Moses fit with the gospel? That's the issue, okay? So verse 21, let's read down through verse 31, and then we'll kind of work back through this text. So verse 21, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman was by promise, which things are an allegory. For these are the 2 covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which engenders bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear, break forth and shout, you who do not travail, for the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. All right. So you see, he returns back to this discussion. Where does the law fit with the gospel? So, verse 21, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? Now, part of what he's doing then is he's going right to those people who want to kind of blend the law and the gospel. And he's essentially saying, do you hear what you're saying? You're wanting to be under the law. Do you hear what you're saying? Do you see the consequences of that? The absolute required conclusions. You got to get these if you're going to go back to the law. This is just like what he did earlier in chapter 3 and a little bit of like what he did in chapter 2. So he says, for it is written, Abraham had 2 sons, one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. So you see what he's doing. He's setting this up. So essentially, by going back to Abraham, he just goes right to the roots of the whole discussion. Because who do the Jews believe we are the children of Abraham. That's what this whole thing is about. And it just happens so neatly that Abraham was circumcised, and that's a big part of what's going on in Galatians. It's a big part of what's going to happen in chapter 5. And so we're getting ready to see some of that stuff come up. So Abraham had 2 sons. One was by the bondwoman, one was by the free woman. I wouldn't push this just too terribly hard, but it does seem to fit neatly with everything that's going on. When a child is born to a slave woman, what's that child? Slave. Yep. When a child is born to the free woman, what's that child? Free. So you see in kind of what he's doing here? The Jews, they're Jewish Christians. Now, let me just say this. When I say Jews for the next 25 minutes, when I say Jews, I mean Jewish Christians, okay? So when the Jews who had these understanding, it all goes back to Abraham, Paul's going, let me just take you back to Abraham and explain to you how what you're doing does not work. So you have the 2 sons, one born of the bondwoman, one born of the free. Verse 23, he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh. What is the law? The law was a fleshly system. And so he's tying some of these ideas together. The Jews put everything on the flesh. They put everything on the law because the law of Moses was in many ways a very fleshly system. That does not mean that God did not require the heart. We already know that. And the times where God was pretty much sick and tired of Israel was because they'd left the heart at home and went and did all the ritualistic stuff. That never worked. God wanted their heart too, but again, this idea of being predominantly fleshly. So he says he was born according to the flesh. And he of the free woman was by promise. What did we talk about 2 classes ago? Played such a heavy hand in that text as we were contrasting the law of Moses with the promise. Remember that? The promise of Abraham. That was back in chapter 3. In fact, nearly all of chapter 3. The promise of Abraham. The promise, the promise, the promise. Now, let's think for a second. So we're talking about Ishmael and Isaac. So, it's really hard to say that backwards, by the way. So Ishmael was born of the flesh. Now, obviously, if we're thinking literal, Isaac was born the same way. But the difference was, Isaac was the son of promise. That's what this whole thing's about. Isaac was the promised son that God told Abraham was going to come, and all the promises would come through. That didn't happen with Ishmael. That wasn't going to happen with Ishmael. It was going to happen through Isaac. So, one son, Ishmael, one son, Isaac. He says this is an allegory. That is, this is a story. This is a narrative that means more than what it looks like it means. This is not just about a story in ancient Mesopotamia about Abraham and his concubine and then his actual wife. A whole lot more going on in this story. But nevertheless, he says it's saying something else. Maybe as a side note here, it's become very popular the last few years to try to allegorize everything. I think that's very, very unwise to do. If Scripture makes an allegory, then it's an allegory. If Scripture doesn't make an allegory, we need to be very careful about that, okay? So he says this is an allegory. These are the two covenants. One from Mount Sinai, which engenders bondage, which is Hagar. He doesn't necessarily come out and just explicitly say it, but when he gets to it in verse 26, he kind of lays it out a little bit. So, this happens at Mount Sinai. Interesting. Mount Sinai was also what? Was also where what happened? How about I do it like that? Where they got the law. Coincidence? I think not. So, God says there are the two covenants. One from Mount Sinai, and it means bondage. Now that is Hagar. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is. Okay, so let's think for a second. So this is Mount Sinai. This is Hagar. This is ultimately about the law of Moses, and by extension of that, circumcision and all of the ritualistic keepings of the old law. So this is over here on one side of the discussion. He says that engenders bondage. Now maybe you think, okay, what does that even mean, engenders bondage? Well, remember what we're contrasting that with. Well, what are we contrasting bondage with? This is low-hanging fruit. Freedom. Liberty. Freedom and liberty. And so, pursuit of happiness in the American way. No, I'm kidding. But you have bondage over here contrasted with freedom over here. Now, in one sense, the law of Moses did engender bondage in that it was a reminder of sin year by year because they had to continually offer sacrifices. Oh, wow, right up until Jesus offered one time for all, right? Some of this is tying in really neatly with a couple of lessons I've done recently relating to the old law and how we view it with the gospel. So you've got Mount Sinai, bondage, Hagar, the law of Moses over here. In contrast, or corresponding to that, you've got Jerusalem, which now is. So Jerusalem's over here and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem above is free. You see, he's almost shifting a little bit. He's relating this in an allegory. At the same time, he's saying, you got to see where we're going with this. It's not just about physical, earthly Israel anymore. It's not just about the law of Moses. It's ultimately about spiritual Jerusalem. It's ultimately about where all of this gets us. And look at what he calls Jerusalem. Jerusalem above is what? Free. Free. Now, verse 26 is significant too. Not just because he identifies Jerusalem from above and Jerusalem free, but he identifies Jerusalem as who? The mother of who? All of us. A couple of classes ago in chapter 3, we talked about that. You guys remember how really significant that was. Jerusalem's the mother of us all. Now, again, he's talking about Sarah. Sarah was the wife. Sarah was the free woman. Sarah was the one through whom the promised child would come. And so all of this is kind of getting the way paved for what's going to ultimately happen as God fulfills the promises to Abraham through the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, She is the mother of us all. And just for a sake of consistency, go back in your mind to the way Galatians 3 ended, that we're all children of Abraham. We're all baptized into the family of God, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female, but we're all one in Christ. Guys, this is some earth-shattering stuff, okay? So Jerusalem above is free. She's the mother of us all. And then he quotes from Isaiah 54. What's before Isaiah 54? And if you say Isaiah 53, I will accept that. I'm going to make you do it anyway. What's before Isaiah 54? You can say it. I just said it, but you can say it. Isaiah 53. Okay, great. Now, what's in Isaiah 53? The foretelling of the coming of Christ. That section of Isaiah, it's Isaiah 40 basically all the way through chapter 66, the end of Isaiah, is so heavy on the Messiah. So heavy on the Messiah. By the way, really cool exercise. Get our songbook and look through it and see how many songs come from Isaiah 40 through 66. Isaiah 40 alone has 7 or 8 songs in our hymnal from that chapter. Pretty cool. So, quotes from Isaiah 54, "Rejoice, O barren." Who was barren in the Genesis story? Sarah. Sarah couldn't have children. Now remember what happens, folks. When Sarah can't have a child, what happens? She so willingly, so kindly and graciously said, "Hey, Hubs, here's my little friend. Why don't you have a child with her? Because that's going to be great for everybody." Okay? Said no sincere wife ever. So, you seeing what's happening? So, "Rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear. Break forth and shout, you who do not travail, for the desolate has many children than she who has a husband." So you get what he's working on. Ultimately, Abraham has Ishmael, and at first breaks forth and has lots of children. So Abraham starts, babies come along, and now we get lots of babies and lots of babies and lots of babies through Hagar. Now, I don't misunderstand me and mean that he has lots of children with Hagar, but because they get a jump on that, there's a lot of children that come through that lineage. By contrast, Sarah starts a lot slower. Years later, before she can has a child, finally has Isaac, and it takes a little while. But what happens eventually, his point is, the true-born children, the promised children, far surpass those of the previous. And here's what's so cool about this. Even spiritually, "Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise." That's the next verse. So we, in the spiritual Israel, have even more, far surpassed physical Israel ever. Y'all see that? So we might have started slow. The gospel, in some sense, started slow. 3,000 on the day of Pentecost is not very many in the great big scheme of things. But what happened? It just built steam. And so it's continued to grow. And now the one who was barren has cause for rejoice. Sarah received the fulfillment of the promise God gave to her and her husband Abraham. This is pretty remarkable stuff, though granted it is somewhat hard to read through and think, okay, where's he going with this? What's he talking about? So let's tie this in. Verse 29. "But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now." Y'all see this? Pretty obvious. Okay, this one's low-hanging fruit too. So Ishmael, and Hagar in particular, kind of taunted and tormented Sarah and Isaac. Well, now what's happening? Jewish Christians persecuting Gentile Christians. And even in some sense, the Jewish people persecuting Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. And so either case, the whole point is, it's still happening. It's happening all over again. Those who are born of the flesh, harming those who are born of the Spirit. So nevertheless, verse 30, "What does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman." What point is that making in this context? So we can kind of stay grounded on what's going on. What point is that making?
Very pointedly saying that if you want to be a Jew in the sense of following the old law, you will be left behind.
You bet. So if you want, go back to the verse 21, you want to desire to be under the law again, you better see what you're getting in. And what you're getting in is what you're getting out now. You're being cast out. You are no longer an heir because the son of the bondwoman does not receive. only the son of the free woman receives. So then, brethren, we are not the children of the bondwoman, but of the free. So you see kind of where he's working on all this. This is so, it's so rich in the Old Testament, even though he only quotes from the Old Testament one time, and that's in verse 30. But his point stands pretty powerfully as an allegory for Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. So here's something to think about too. None of this is acknowledging Hagar wasn't blessed greatly by God. She was. In fact, by the way, that's one of the most beautiful stories in Genesis that's kind of overlooked. Hagar goes in the wilderness to die, and God says, wait a minute, you're not going to die. He sees this woman who's made forced into a concubine service to a man she probably doesn't want to have sex with, and then God sees her in the wilderness and says, hey, get up. Get up. You're going to be okay. And then she calls him the God who sees. That's awesome. That's just plain awesome. Hagar was greatly blessed, but she was not going to be the recipient of all the promises God gave to Abraham. She was still taken care of by God. In a similar sense then, the Jewish people, in trying to just hang on to the law of Moses, were in some ways wasting the very blessings of God. God had blessed them greatly. Paul acknowledges that back in Romans chapter 3. I'm saying all this anti-Jewish stuff, anti-law stuff is the way it sounds in Romans 2, and then he anticipates that in Romans 3, and he says, you guys have been greatly blessed by God, because it was to you the oracles of God were entrusted to. But now you've got to see the gospel. Just like Hagar was blessed, but the promises would come through Sarah. And so the Jewish people were greatly blessed. But they needed to see how all of that fulfilled itself in Jesus the Messiah through the gospel and ultimately spiritual Jerusalem, spiritual Israel. All right? Questions on some of that? Like I said, I know some of these spots, you work on them, you think, man, what in the world's going on? But questions on that?
I love the way that the chapter ends the way it begins.
Yeah.
We break the chapters up, but it's still, pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's talking about this idea that, if you're an heir, you're a child, you're an heir to the things that are the Father's.
Mm-hmm.
There wouldn't be any, heir that would come from a slave woman.
Yeah.
But this idea of you are a true son of the Father, so you are an heir of His.
Yeah.
And then you have the ability to have what was the Father's. And
Yeah.
it ends that same way.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
if you were a child of the bondwoman, how would you be an heir?
Yeah, exactly. And so getting them to see the logical requirements of what they're trying to propose. Because here's the thing. Some of these dudes were probably pretty sincere and did not realize, hey, that's where that goes, man. I think you can sense some of that in the way Paul addresses some of them. At the same time, there are some of them who probably do know. He calls those troublers in the next chapter. But there were probably some who didn't understand the consequences of their doctrine. Paul's working on some of that here. It's a really good point. By the way, and this is fun. I'm going to throw this in for free. A lot of our Bible is written in ways that help it be memorable, because for generations, Bible readers did not have the text so easily available to them. And so Galatians is written this way a little bit. It's called chiasms. And so it's written to mirror the text. And so it's not uncommon to see what Shelton just pointed out. The text will start this, and it builds to a big point and goes back. And the latter points mirror everything he just said in the previous stuff. And at the end, you'll go, oh, he's talking about being an heir to God again. That's where he started. It's because he built to this point, you see. Didn't even charge y'all for that one. That was good. All right. So questions then beyond that? All right, so let's do some applications then out of this text. And I know that some of these texts, and this text is no different. You go, okay, just wonderful, Devan. How do we make applications from a text about Abraham and Hagar and Sarah? Like, number one, don't take a concubine. That's easy. What else you got? All right, so let's see what we can do then. What are some ways we can apply this? Go ahead, Jeff. I'll take anything I can get at this point.
Everywhere where we have the law and bondage, bondwoman, we can replace that with sin with our previous life.
Yeah?
So if we go back, we're no longer there.
Yeah.
We could put ourselves back in bondage.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
freedom is specifically talking about the old law.
yeah.
Today, it would be anything outside of God.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe then we're trying to simplify that in an application. It would be just to simply understand. Perfect. Look at that. Understand bondage, slavery. You know, I think it's interesting in some ways our culture, while so mixed up on things, has a better understanding in some levels for these ideas than just even a generation or two ago, because I think it's in our faces all the time. We see addiction and things like that, and it's like, oh wow, great illustrations for what slavery to things, bondage are. Well, guys, I don't think it's any small, insignificant point. Insignificant? Let me try that again. Insignificant point to what he's talking about. How many times does Scripture relate the life outside of Jesus as bondage or slavery? By the way, Romans 6 ties in really neatly here, and it's a type that's connected back to the Exodus. Israel's in bondage in Egypt and redeemed by God's strong right arm, and they crossed the Red Sea in baptism under the baptism of Moses, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Wow, I wonder where the New Testament got some of those ideas. Some of the same stuff. Okay, what's maybe one more then? Go ahead, Shelton, and then Larry. Oh, Larry, you get different. You're an elder. You get sorry, Shelton. Go ahead.
There seems to be a trajectory. If Sarah and Abram had not lost in their patience toward the Lord, having children and so on, but they did what really wasn't pleasing to God, and look at all the downstream
Yeah.
that arose out of that. We need to continue following the Lord and waiting for His blessing.
Yeah. That's a great observation. You think about what really in some sense feels like an insignificant story to the people who are experiencing it. And look at the ripple effects through biblical history that go back to Abraham, Sarah, and their ongoing faithfulness. By the way, I don't know if we give them enough credit. We give Abraham a lot of credit, but you understand that Romans 4 and Hebrews 11 both acknowledge the deadness of Sarah's womb, not very flattering, and him being as good as dead. Folks, you know how much faith it took to continue to try to have children as they got up into way late years? That took faith. We don't think about that, maybe because it doesn't preach very well with the children in here. But still a good point. Shelton, very quickly, go ahead, buddy.
I was just going to say, there are people out there, and there will be people trying to deceive us with flashy words, and there will be people out there teaching us the truth.
Yeah.
It's our job to, know the difference between those two people.
Yeah, we've got to be discerning. We've got to be discerning about people because there are deceivers out there. I forgot to put the ones up from Sunday. But anyways, number one, we must speak the truth even when it makes enemies. That's not the goal, by no means. But Paul acknowledges that the truth must be spoken. In fact, you might even say the truth should be spoken in love. Okay, Paul says that in another place. But the truth must be spoken. Number two, be discerning. This is Shelton's point. False teachers made it sound bad. No one would believe it. Number three, we should be passionate about good. And I'm being very generic and open there. It's the gospel, it's truth, but it's more than that. We should be passionate, zealous. Number four, even when stern, we can be compassionate and loving. And then number five, be comforted. We are the freeborn, true children and full inheritors of the promise. And now the swarm is upon us. All right, thank you for your careful attention. Helvey should be teaching Sunday. And he'll be covering that next section. So I appreciate your attention.